Hi everyone, and welcome to the LTE Migration Webinar. My name is Lauren Amalia, and I am the Marketing Manager here at Barcodes. As you may have seen, Verizon recently announced that they will be decommissioning their 3G networks by the end of 2019. Additionally, every major carrier has already begun transitioning their available network spectrum to 4G and 5G networks, with anticipated announcements from AT&T and T-Mobile communicating the same strategy Verizon has very soon. With that said, it is clear the time is now to begin looking to transition your devices on older networks. Today, we'll be discussing the benefits and timing associated with this transition and how Zebra and Barcodes can help create an individualized plan for migration. We have lots of great content to share with you today, and we've got a great lineup. We have Terry Bitts, who is the Senior Carrier Technical Manager at Zebra Technologies, and he'll be discussing the LTE campaign in more into depth and go through what's happening with carrier networks, why they're looking to transition, and what some of those key benefits are of 4G and how it differs from 2G and 3G. We also have Rob Nordby, who is the Channel Account Manager at Zebra, and he'll be here to answer any questions during our Q&A towards the end. Lastly, I'll be able to discuss some of the services that Barcodes offers and how we can help make the migration easier for you. And then, as mentioned, we'll have the Q&A and answer any questions you guys have. We do have a chat feature available on this webinar, so please feel free to ask any questions, and we'll answer them during the Q&A. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Terry. Terry, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Lorna, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Let's jump into the presentation. All right, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to discuss what's happening with carrier networks, why they are transitioning to LTE from 2G and 3G, what's coming in the near future, how Zebra and Barcode is here to help, and then, as mentioned, Lauren is going to go over some Barcode services, and we'll finish up with a Q&A. All right, so as mentioned, Verizon announced the ending date for when they plan to start decommissioning their network. And really the start of that occurred this year. So as of July 1st of this year, Verizon will no longer activate non-LTE devices on their network. And what that means is that if you happen to have a 2G or 3G device that is not LTE compatible, if you attempt to activate a new line of service with Verizon, they will not allow you to do that. It has to be LTE capable device. So again, that was July 1st of this year. And really that's in planning for their transition, which begins in January 1st, 2020, when they begin decommissioning their network. All right. And just to make sure it's clear, Verizon come January 1st, 2020 is not going to turn out the lights on their 2G, 3G network. We want to make sure that's clear. However, they're going to begin decommissioning it. I think the best way to think of it is think of a large building with a lot of light bulbs. Come January 1st, 2020, Verizon is going to begin removing those light bulbs and essentially starting their turn down effort. And it will take a little bit of time, but for certain, within a couple years of that date, that network will be dark. All right. And as is shown in the last piece on that slide, that eventually the other networks are expected to follow suit. All right. So Verizon has publicly announced this. Got a headline below, mentions it. Verizon talking about it as well from their spokesperson. All right. But then the question is, all right, what about AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile? What are they doing? Well, AT&T actually decommissioned their 2G network back in the early part of 2017. So they already flipped the switch on that. They do have their 3G network still live. They have not publicly announced a date on when they will be turning down that network. The reason is they do know when they're going to do it. They do not want to say. And that's because back when they turned off their 2G network, immediately T-Mobile started advertising that, hey, AT&T customers, you can come over to our network. We still have 2G available. So AT&T got burned a little bit on the last time, so they're going to stay a little bit mum on the details. However, they will be running in similar timeframes as Verizon. All indications are that they will be transitioning off that 3G network, similar timeframe. So you can expect in starting in 2020 and then completing within 2 years of that date that their 3G network will be completely dark as well. Now, Sprint has really not said a lot, either publicly nor privately. However, based on where they are headed with their network, they're probably a little bit behind AT&T and Verizon with turning off their 2G, 3G network, but they also plan to do so. T-Mobile has not made a defined public statement outside of their CTO. Has said that they would love to turn off their 2G, 3G network in 2019 if possible. Again, they haven't publicly stated that, but you kind of get the idea that these carriers are all in similar timeframes trying to turn down these old networks. And let's get into some details on why that's happening. All right, so each carrier has a limited amount of RF spectrum available for its use. And you can think of RF spectrum as pipes like you would have in your home, all right? You only have so many pipes, and each pipe is only so large. Well, that's really what this RF spectrum is. It is not an unlimited resource. Each carrier, through buying licenses from the FCC or through purchasing other companies, has spectrum available for their use. And it's somewhat illustrated in this chart of what each carrier has for spectrum. Now, this changes all the time, again, because of FCC auctions that occur or purchases. And in fact, Verizon has a bit more spectrum than is shown there because they did buy a company for high band spectrum, and that has to do with 5G, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But nonetheless, it's a limited resource available for their use. And LTE is far more spectrally efficient than 2G, 3G technologies. Well, what that means is that, okay, you still only have the same amount of data pipes, and those pipes are only so large, but LTE allows the carrier to shove far more information through their pipes than they would with the old technologies. So they can cram more data into that same limited bandwidth. And so that's what that efficiency is. All right, and this is very important for the carriers because to meet the data demand that the carriers are encountering, they really need to use that spectrum that's being used for 2G, 3G and convert it to use to 4G LTE. And we all know about the data demands. I mean, people are streaming music, they're streaming videos, they're now streaming HD videos, they're talking about streaming 4K videos. All of that takes a massive amount of data, and the carriers are experiencing that. They're experiencing these data loads on their network, so they really need to look at moving to technologies that make a more efficient use of that spectrum. All right, so really another item that's driving this change is that the need for 2G and 3G networks has declined. All right, LTE networks now basically equal or in some cases exceed those old legacy networks. In the case of Verizon and AT&T, they've been actually working with LTE for a long time. In the case of Verizon, they launched their LTE network in 2010. And as of a couple years ago, they had essentially one-to-one coverage. Their LTE network covered what their 2G, 3G network did. And that's basically the same for AT&T. T-Mobile, who traditionally was a player in urban markets or would have cell sites along major roadways, their LTE network actually surpasses their old 2G, 3G network. And the reason is as they have expanded more into rural areas and continue to do so, their new cell sites are LTE only. So that's why their network is larger. And somewhat is happening the same with Sprint. Sprint is now on a major build out of their network too. And those are LTE cell sites. All right. As of today, more than 90+% of the data on US mobile networks is on LTE. Now with a carrier like Verizon, it's actually 95+% of all the data being used on their network is over LTE. So very, very little of the data being used in the US is actually going across those old 2G, 3G networks. Now, some of that is because those old networks could not support, high data use. You could not stream HD videos. In some cases, you couldn't stream videos at all. And so in those cases, those networks didn't support it. And when you have these new use cases of streaming videos, streaming high definition videos, you could only do that over LTE. But none the case, really most of the carrier network, data network now is all over LTE. And then we have voice over LTE, which is simply where we're able to use LTE networks for voice traffic. That is replacing what's called circuit switch calling. Right, in the old days, you had to use 2G, 3G networks for that. That's no longer the case. Voice over LTE, in replacing that, allows these carriers to get away from those 2G, 3G networks. This last one's kind of a big deal. I mean, over the last number of years, how many of us sat through presentations where they talked about IoT? Billions and billions of devices that'll be on networks. Well, up until a couple years ago, LTE did not really support the use of IoT devices on the network. LTE was designed as a broadband network. So, for broadband activities like streaming music, streaming video, downloading very large files. It wasn't meant for IoT use cases where you're really just using small amounts of data. It's very bursty type traffic, as they call it. Well, then the standards bodies developed the methods in order to more efficiently use IoT devices on LTE, all right? And I'd point to the very bottom item on the network where Verizon announced the launch of their LTE, what's called a CAT M1 IoT network. That is one of the technologies that allows them to efficiently use IoT on over LTE. And that announcement came out early this year, and not coincidentally, just a couple weeks after they made that announcement, they made the public announcement of when they would be turning off their CDMA network. So those items are tied together, and that is because they can now support IoT over LTE networks. All right, so also what's happening is that really these legacy networks, they're really reaching the end of their viability, and there's cost differences at play. These 2G, 3G networks are around 20 years old. And I say around 20 years old because 2G is actually greater than 20 years old. It dates back into the 1990s. It was technology that was developed in the early 90s, and really the US carriers started rolling it out in the mid to late 90s. 3G really started rolling out in the early 2000s. So when you kind of average them together, you got about 20 years old. The big takeaway from that is when you start talking 20-year-old technology, when it comes to mobile technology, that's very old. All right, those things are designed for different use cases. If you look at the chart below, you'll see that 2G was really a voice-based technology. That's what it was designed for, because back in the 90s, people did not use their cell phones or their mobile devices for data. It was really primarily a voice-driven use case. And certainly as we moved into 3G, they call it mobile broadband, but still really the use cases were designed around voice. These mobile devices were voice-centric, data secondary. Now, as we got to 4G, it was the opposite. That was not designed as a voice technology. It was actually designed as a mobile broadband technology. And then VoLTE brought in voice capability. So again, the point is 20 years old, that's a long time and is very old when it comes to these technologies. And the carriers have essentially moved on from that. And certainly there's a good number of devices on 2G and 3G, although it's shrinking daily. But when you even talk to some of the salespeople, I've encountered salespeople at the carriers who do not have any really exposure to 2G devices. In the case of Verizon, I've worked with salespeople who have never activated a device that doesn't have SIMs in it. And of course, SIM is tied to LTE for Verizon. Back before that, it was all device-based activation. And so when you would bring a 2G, 3G device to them to activate, they were a little bit lost. The first thing they wanted to talk about was SIM. So it kind of tells you internally in these companies, they've really moved on from that. 2G, 3G is really the history, and they've really only been thinking about LTE since, the 2010 timeframe. That's all they really think about. That's what they market to. and that's where they've been headed. All right. Also, these LTE networks are more cost efficient to run than these old networks. All right, one of the largest expenses for a cell phone carrier is their utility costs tied to cell sites. And you can imagine they've got thousands and thousands of cell sites. And a 2G, 3G network requires much more equipment to run than an LTE network. Not only that, you've doubled up your equipment. You've got LTE equipment, you got this legacy equipment. They all use electricity. They use a large amount of electricity. And then you have to cool these small shacks. I'm sure you've seen these small shacks around. They have to thermally control them. They can't let them get too hot in there. So they have to run these air conditioning systems. That's very high utility costs for these carriers. And they want to get rid of those costs, obviously, for obvious reasons, just to lower their utility bills. Very big cost for them. Then again, the LTE spectral efficiency. All right, they've made billions of dollars of investment into spectrum, and to get their best return of investment is to move to LTE. Well, then we have this little item called 5G. And as noted before, very common up until a few years ago that, as of a few years ago, you could go to a presentation and everybody had their IoT slide. It's going to be, you're going to go to a presentation, everyone's going to have a 5G slide. And that's because it's launching. All right, Verizon and AT&T have announced that they are launching their 5G this year. They're on their fifth generation networks. And that is a big deal for them. That is the future. They are spending a lot of money on newer spectrum. They're making very large investments. They're rolling this out. Now 5G, even though it's in its early form, they expect to really ramp up into 5G use in approximately 2020 to 2021. So then it's no coincidence that they plan to shut off their 2G, 3G networks come the same time frame. So again, this is really to highlight the carriers have moved on from 2G, 3G. They would like nothing more to move all those customers off those old networks and get them on to these newer, more spectrally efficient networks. And then they've got the newest stuff coming along. And it's hard to believe 4G LTE is really been out in the US for 8 years. It's not a fully mature technology, it's maturing. But coming right behind it is 5G. And 4G is not, don't get concerned. 4G is not going anywhere. 5G is going to be an add-on to 4G. So there's a lot of life left in 4G, and it's going to be around for a good number of years. All right, so what's going to happen in the next couple years? What can we expect? All right, spectrum refarming activities at the carriers is likely to increase. Okay, what that means is that even in advance of them shutting down the networks, they are going to be peeling away spectrum from 2G, 3G and using it in LTE. And when you do that, when you peel away spectrum from one and put it to another, that means there's less spectrum for use for those old technologies. With less spectrum becomes less system resources. When you got less system resources, you're going to experience decline in data speeds. And in fact, we've heard from some of our customers in some areas where they have actually seen these declines on their 2G, 3G devices. They have seen the speed decreases. Well, that's because of this refarming activity that's taken place. All right. One of the other side items that's going to occur is you could see possible declines in 3G coverage. As they are peeling away spectrum and there's less radio frequency devoted towards the operation of those 2G, 3G networks, you will likely start seeing some gaps. Now, certainly where you had great coverage before, you're not going to all of a sudden see a coverage gap. Where this will show up will be in areas where there was marginal coverage or where you were on the edge of cell sites before. Possibly likely in rural areas. I would expect, and I'm located in the Chicago region, that come 2020, it would not surprise me if I would take a trip from Chicago and headed west towards, let's say, Colorado, that I could go through some areas rural areas where I would find no 2G, 3G coverage as they peel that away. All right, and some of this is highlighted on what's happening where this note in Fierce Wireless, where they saw that Verizon is really down to their last 10 megahertz of PCS spectrum in New York City that they've started using, or I'm sorry, they started using that last part of PCS spectrum. All that they have left is their old legacy non-PCS spectrum that they're using for 2G, 3G. So this is taking place. This is a real thing happening. This will likely increase. So you can expect, even in advance of them beginning the turn down, you're going to start seeing some of these things happen. Less resources, declines in data speeds, possible service gaps. All right, but that leads us into this is the reason why you want to start transitioning now. All right, LTE is a better technology. It's the modern technology. It's meant for the modern use case. With LTE and LTE devices, you're going to have greater coverage, increased reliability from these mobile devices, mobile networks. This 10x data speeds of 3G, actually 10x is on the small end now, or on the low end, can actually see 100x of 3G. Shortened latency times. Latency is just how long it takes from a bit of data to go from one point to another. Simultaneous voice and data. If you were on Verizon or Sprint, 2G, 3G devices, you could not surf the net and have a voice call in operation at the same time. You can do that on LTE. Noticeably better voice quality using VoLTE. I think we've all experienced that when you're on a VoLTE call, that nice rich sound of the voice, clarity. Continuation of service via SIM card. To simply activate a device, you can move a SIM from one to another, assuming the same technology support, but activation is much simpler. And then, of course, work boosting modern devices, where these devices today are designed to be efficient. They work more efficient with the operator networks. You got, in general, lighter devices. So overall, a boost in efficiency. And really, I don't need to go over the complications of sticking to it. The biggest one is your spotty coverage and decline in data speeds. Want to avoid that stuff. So really, the time to migrate is now. Hey, the good news is, hey, Zebra has the device portfolio and the knowledge to assist in this transition. Not to pat ourselves on the back, well, actually, to pat ourselves on the back. Zebra was anticipating these changes coming, and in fact, this device portfolio of LTE, this is our second generation of LTE. So we've been doing this for a little while. And then as far as the transition, we have great relationships with the carriers. We have great in-house technical knowledge. We anticipated these changes. We were making plans for this. We started working with customers, with partners to understand these changes, and we've been a big advocate to get the customers to realize what was happening and why they needed to change. All right, with that, I will pass it back to Lorna.
Thank you, Terry. We have a lot of great services to make the migration easier for you. When mobile devices arrive on site, you want to be able to deploy them immediately, not wait for days to test each device, load the software, and confirm that the system is operational. So we can really go in and help you save time, labor, and money by staging and kitting all your mobile devices and some of those associated equipment for you prior to delivery. With spare pool management, you can always rest assured that you'll have operational efficiency. We keep your devices charged and activated in case one of your other devices unexpectedly breaks, and we ship it out to you right away. With break fix support services, we'll repair your device in absolutely no time. Of course, carrier activation is very important. We work directly with the carriers to make sure that your devices are activated on Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and more. Carriers don't activate enterprise devices at their retail stores, so they really rely on us to activate them. And then with True Support is our support service for covered products, and it provides guaranteed technical support, repair management tracking, advance exchange, spare pool management, device triage, and OEM service contract management. So essentially, all of our devices are backed by our manufacturer service contracts. So very important there. And then with that, we will open it up for Q&A. Just as a reminder, guys, that you have the chat feature available right below your screens. It's a little spot that says Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a great time to ask. Alrighty, well, I think Terry, you can move to the last slide. If you guys have any additional questions, anything else that you want answered, just let us know. You can email me directly at malja@barcodesinc.com, or just shoot me a call, 855-400-0971. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we hope that you guys learned a lot. Terry, thank you so much. Have a great one, everybody.